The signal came through at 0300 hours, piercing through the darkness of space like a scream. It was broken, desperate, and carried the unmistakable sound of dying people begging for help. The communications officer at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station sat frozen for 3 full seconds before her training kicked in. She routed the signal to every major command center on the planet. Within the hour, the message had been translated. The Savathi were under attack. Their colony world was burning. Their ships were destroyed. Their people were dying. They begged anyone listening to please help them. Please. The word repeated 17 times in the 2-minute message. Please, please, please. The Savathi were peaceful. Everyone in the galaxy knew this. They made art that could make hardened warriors weep. They wrote philosophy that shaped civilizations. They had never raised a weapon against another species in their 3,000 years among the stars. They were gentle herbivores with large eyes and soft fur, who greeted strangers with gifts and poetry. Now someone was killing them. The Galactic Council of Aligned Worlds convened within 6 hours. Representatives from 43 species gathered in the Grand Chamber on Nexus Station, their voices filling the hall with debate. The Korshal Dominion had violated territorial agreements. This was an act of aggression. Something must be done. Forms must be filed. Committees must investigate. Sanctions must be discussed. The process would take time, they said. Weeks, perhaps months. They must follow proper procedures. Ambassador Sarah Williams sat in the human delegation box and felt her blood pressure rising with each passing minute. Beside her, military liaison Colonel Marcus Drake kept his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. They had been part of the galactic community for only 20 years. Earth was still the new kid, still learning the rules, still trying to prove they belonged among the stars. But this was not about rules. This was about people dying while bureaucrats argued about paperwork. The Savathi colony has approximately 40,000 civilians, the Hexari representative was saying, his crystalline body refracting the chamber lights. A tragic situation, certainly, but we must consider the diplomatic ramifications of intervening in Korshal territory. They claim salvage rights to that sector. Salvage rights? Williams felt the words leave her mouth before she could stop them. The chamber fell silent. Dozens of eyes, some human-like, others completely alien, turned to stare at her. Those are people, not salvage. They're being murdered while we sit here debating procedure. The council speaker, a towering Vexnari with 6 arms, tilted his massive head. Ambassador Williams, humanity's passion is noted, but you must understand the complexities of galactic politics. The Korshal Dominion is powerful. They have ancient territorial claims. To challenge them risks war. Then there will be war, Williams said, standing now. Drake stood with her, his hand instinctively moving to where his sidearm would be if weapons were permitted in the chamber. Earth is going to Siva Prime. We're going to answer that distress call. We're going to stop what's happening there. Shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Pelthori delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline suit, spoke up. You cannot be serious. Humanity has been in space for barely 2 decades. You have 12 ships capable of interstellar combat. The Korshal have hundreds. You would be obliterated. Williams met the being's gaze without flinching. Maybe. But at least we'll be able to look ourselves in the mirror afterward. How about you? The chamber erupted in chaos. Species argued in a dozen languages. The speaker called for order, his voice booming through translation devices. Through it all, Williams stood firm, Drake beside her like a statue carved from stone. Finally, the speaker raised all 6 arms. Silence fell slowly. The Council cannot sanction this action. You would be acting outside galactic law. We cannot support you. We're not asking for your support, Williams said quietly. We're telling you what we're going to do. Send observers if you want. Send your news crews. Watch what happens when someone answers a distress call instead of filing it away. She turned and walked out. Drake followed. Behind them, the chamber exploded with debate once more, but they didn't look back. 12 hours later, the UN Expeditionary Fleet prepared for departure. It wasn't much by galactic standards. The carrier Indomitable, 3 destroyers, 2 frigates, and 5 support ships. Just over 8,000 personnel, most of them young, many of them scared, all of them determined. Admiral Rebecca Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching Earth shrink in the view screen. She was 53 years old, a veteran of 3 regional conflicts back home, and she had never imagined she would lead humanity's first major military action in space. The responsibility felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her executive officer reported. Commander James Okafor was 10 years younger than her but had fought beside her in the resource wars. She trusted him with her life. "Signal from Earth Command." "Ma'am," the communications officer called out. "They're patching through the Secretary General." The elderly man's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired. "Admiral Chen, the eyes of Earth are on you. The eyes of the galaxy are on you. Do what's right. Bring our people home, and for God's sake show them what we're made of." "Yes, sir," Chen replied. "We'll bring them home." The connection ended. Chen took a deep breath and gave the order she had been preparing for all her life. "All ships, jump drives to maximum. Set course for Siva Prime. It's time to answer the call." The fleet jumped, tearing holes in reality itself, racing toward a war that would change the galaxy forever. Behind them, Earth held its breath. Ahead of them, the Sivathi continued dying, not knowing that help was finally coming. Help from a world so deadly that most species considered it barely habitable. Help from creatures who had clawed their way to the top of their planet's food chain through sheer stubbornness. Help from humanity. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were angry. The human fleet dropped out of jump space at the edge of the Siva Prime system, and the first thing they saw was carnage. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers, the shattered remains of civilian stations and transport ships tumbling slowly through the void. Some pieces were still burning despite the vacuum, their internal atmospheres feeding the flames until they gutted themselves. Admiral Chen stared at the tactical display, her face carved from ice. "Casualty estimates?" "Based on station population," Lieutenant Park's voice caught. 15,000 dead minimum. Maybe more. Those were evacuation stations, ma'am. They were full of families. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet beeping of instruments. Chen watched the debris field rotate slowly on the screen. Someone's home. Someone's workplace. Someone's school. All of it reduced to spinning metal and frozen bodies. "Contact," Sensor Officer Martinez called out sharply. 6 heavy cruisers, core shell configuration, moving to intercept. "They're hailing us." "Put it through," Chen ordered. The view screen flickered. A core shell appeared. He was massive, over 3 meters tall, even-seated, with thick-scaled hide the color of rust and 4 arms that ended in claws. His species had evolved as apex predators on a heavy-gravity world. They looked like nightmares given flesh. "Unknown vessels," the Korshal commander said, his voice a deep rumble through the translator. "You have entered Korshal territorial space. You will power down your weapons and submit to inspection. Refusal will result in your immediate destruction." Chen studied the creature. His body language spoke of complete confidence. Why wouldn't he be confident? His 6 ships massed 3 times what her entire fleet did. His weapons were plasma-based, far more advanced than humanity's kinetic systems. By every measure, he should crush her. Fleet without breaking a sweat. "This is Admiral Rebecca Chen of the United Nations Expeditionary Force. We received a distress call from the Sivathi colony on Siva Prime. We're here to render assistance." The Korshal's eyes widened slightly. Then he laughed. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. "Assistance? Little mammals, do you understand the situation? This system belongs to the Dominion now. The Sivathi belong to the Dominion. And if you do not leave immediately, you will also belong to the Dominion." He leaned forward. "I am Commander Thexral, and I have been killing for 3 centuries. Surrender your ships. We will be merciful. Resist and we will tear you apart." Chen heard soft laughter behind her. She glanced back to see Commander Okafor grinning. Lieutenant Park was smiling too. Even young Ensign Cooper, fresh out of the academy, was chuckling. Thexral's expression shifted to confusion. "You find something amusing?" "Yeah," Chen said, letting her own smile show. "We do. You analyzed our weapon systems, right? Saw that we still use kinetic projectiles, chemical propellants, that we're basically throwing rocks really fast? Primitive technology," Thexral confirmed. "Your plasma weapons are weak. Your shields are barely functional. You cannot harm us." "That's where you're wrong," Chen said softly. "See, we don't use plasma because it's efficient. We use kinetic weapons because they're mean. Because when a depleted uranium round moving at 15,000 meters per second hits your hull, it doesn't just make a hole. It turns everything inside into superheated vapor. She leaned forward in her chair. And we don't have weak shields. We have redundant armor plating because we assume we're going to get hit. We build our ships to take damage and keep fighting. That's what you do when you come from a death world, Commander. You plan for pain. Thexrel's confusion turned to anger. You dare! All ships! Chen cut him off, switching to fleet-wide communications. Weapons free. Show them what Earth sends to those who murder civilians. The battle began instantly. The Korshal ships opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through standard hulls in seconds. They hit the Indomitable dead center. The shields flared and collapsed. The plasma burned through the outer armor. Damage reports flooded in, but the Indomitable didn't explode. It didn't even slow down. The plasma burned through 4 layers of ablative armor and stopped at the reinforced hull. Return fire, Chen ordered calmly, gripping her armrests as the ship shuddered around her. The Indomitable's railguns spoke. Magnetic acceleration launched projectiles at velocities that made physics professors weep. The tungsten carbide rounds crossed the distance in heartbeats and hit the lead Korshal cruiser like the fist of an angry god. The cruiser's shields didn't just fail. They didn't have time to fail. The rounds punched through them like they weren't even there, tore through the hull and detonated inside the ship. Secondary explosions rippled along its length. It began to list, atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches. Target neutralized, Martinez reported with satisfaction. 5 hostiles remaining. The battle turned into chaos. The Korshal ships maneuvered with their plasma cannons, trying to find weak points in the human formation. The human ships responded with tactics that made no sense. They rolled and dove and spun in patterns that generated G-forces no sane species would tolerate. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Chen felt her vision gray at the edges as they pulled 7 Gs in a hard turn. Her pressure suit inflated, forcing blood back to her brain. Beside her, Okafor's face was locked in a rictus grin as they rolled inverted and came up behind a Korshal destroyer. Firing solution locked. Park called out, his voice strained. Fire! 3 destroyers concentrated their railguns on a single target. The Korshal ship tried to evade, but it was too slow, too predictable. The barrage hit from 3 angles simultaneously. The destroyer came apart like a toy, its fusion core containment failing, adding its own explosion to the carnage. Thexrel's voice cut through the communications channel, no longer confident, now filled with rage and confusion. What are you? How can you move like that? How can you withstand those accelerations? Chen wiped blood from her nose where a vessel had burst from the strain. We come from a world with 0.98 G's standard gravity, Commander. We evolved to run down prey over days. We're built for endurance and punishment. This? She gestured at the battle raging around them. This is just another hunt. She switched channels. All ships, release the wasps. From each human vessel, dozens of small attack drones launched. They were called wasps for good reason. Small and fast and impossible to track. They swarmed the remaining Korshal ships, latching onto hulls and detonating shaped charges on vital systems. It was a tactic no honorable species would use. Cheap drones against mighty warships? Undignified, dishonorable, effective. 2 more Korshal ships went dark, their engines destroyed, their weapons offline. That left 2, including Thexrel's flagship. Enough, the Korshal commander roared. You have proven yourself worthy. We will withdraw. This battle is yours. No, Chen said flatly. We're not here for glory or territory. We're here for the Sivathi. You're going to leave this system and never come back. And you're going to spread the word about what happened here. Thexrel glared at her through the view screen. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded slowly. The mammals have teeth. This will be remembered. His ships turned and began to retreat. But Chen wasn't done. Martinez, are there Korshal ground forces on Siva Prime? Yes, ma'am. Approximately 3,000 troops holding the capital city. Chen's expression hardened. Get me the Marines. It's time to teach them what covering fire means. The drop pods hit the atmosphere of Siva Prime like meteors, trailing fire and screaming through the air at angles that would have killed any other species from G-forces alone. Inside Pod 7, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez gritted her teeth against the pressure, watching her squad through the red emergency lighting. 20 Marines, the youngest barely 19, all of them pressed into their crash harnesses like insects in amber. 30 seconds to impact, she shouted over the roar. Remember your training. Watch your sectors, and for the love of God, don't shoot any civilians. The pods slammed into the ground with enough force to crack concrete. The hatches blew off with explosive charges and the Marines poured out into a nightmare. The Savathi capital was burning. The elegant towers that had stood for centuries were blackened shells. Bodies lay in the streets. The soft-furred aliens cut down as they fled. And everywhere, Korshal shock troops stomped through the ruins, their massive forms dwarfing the few Savathi who still cowered in hiding. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Target's front. Open fire! The sound of human weapons fire filled the air. Modern assault rifles spat rounds at cyclic rates that seemed impossible. Thousands of bullets per minute. The Korshal had energy shields and heavy armor. It didn't matter. The human weapons just kept firing, kept hitting, kept hammering at the same spots until shields collapsed and armor cracked and the massive aliens fell. A Korshal warrior turned toward Rodriguez's position, raising a plasma rifle. She was faster. 3 controlled bursts sent her mass and he went down. Another appeared from a building, roaring. She didn't even blink, just shifted her aim and put him down too. These things die just fine, she called out. Keep moving. Leapfrog pattern. Cover in advance. The Marines moved like they'd trained for years because they had. 2 would fire while 2 moved. Constant pressure, never giving the enemy time to recover or regroup. The Korshal had never faced an opponent like this. They were used to honorable combat, challenges, individual duels of strength and skill. This wasn't that. This was warfare as practiced by a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. A Korshal managed to get a shot off, his plasma blast catching Private Jackson in the chest. The young Marine went down hard, his armor smoking. Rodriguez was moving before he hit the ground, dragging him to cover while the rest of her squad laid down suppressing fire that turned the building the Korshal was hiding in into Swiss cheese. Jackson, talk to me! The private groaned, looking down at the crater burned into his chest plate. The armor had held barely, but the heat had gotten through. His skin was blistered and burned. He looked up at Rodriguez with shock in his eyes. That hurt, Sarge. You'll live. Take this. She injected him with a combat stimulant, watched his pupils dilate. Can you fight? He tested his rifle, winced, nodded. Yeah, I can fight. That was the thing about humans, Rodriguez thought as she helped him up. They could take damage that would kill or cripple most species and just keep going. Pain was just information. Injury was just a problem to solve. You fought until you couldn't anymore, and even then you fought some more. Above the city, the space battle had resumed. The Korshal Dominion had sent reinforcements, a fleet 3 times larger than the first. They dropped out of jump space, expecting to overwhelm the small human force with sheer numbers. Admiral Chen had been waiting for them. All ships, implement Deathworld Doctrine, she ordered. We're going to show them what endurance means. The Deathworld Doctrine was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Humans could fight longer than any other species. They had redundant systems in their bodies, backup organs, healing capabilities that seemed almost magical. Most species needed 8 hours of rest per day. Humans could function on 4, some on even less, for days or weeks if necessary. So Chen divided her crews into 3 shifts. While 2 shifts fought, 1 rested. They rotated constantly, always keeping fresh personnel on critical stations. The ships themselves were built the same way, with redundant systems stacked on redundant systems designed to take punishment and keep operating. The Korshal couldn't match that. They had superior numbers and superior technology, but their crews grew exhausted. Their ships accumulated damage faster than they could repair it. And the humans just kept coming, kept shooting, kept fighting with a relentless determination that bordered on insanity. 72 hours into the battle, Korshal ships began making mistakes. Crews fell asleep at their posts. Commanders lost track of their formations. Weapons fire became wild and inaccurate. The human ships were battered and scarred, but they were still fighting. Still coordinated. Still deadly. On the ground, the Marines had pushed deep into the city. They found Savathi hiding in basements and sewers, terrified families clutching their young. Every time the Marines would clear the area, mark it as safe, and move on to the next building. They didn't have time for comfort or kind words. They just had time for killing. Private James Chen, no relation to the Admiral, found himself pinned down in a marketplace with 3 other Marines. A Korshal heavy weapons team had them locked down, plasma fire so thick they couldn't move without being incinerated. Chen's leg was shattered from a near miss, the bone visible through his shredded armor. He should have been in shock. Should have been screaming. Should have been useless. Instead, he crawled to a better position, set up his rifle, and started picking off the Korshal one by one. Each shot had to count because moving sent lightning bolts of agony through his leg, so he didn't move. He just lay there, breathed through the pain, and shot until the heavy weapons team was dead. "Chen," his corporal shouted. "Why the hell didn't you call for extraction?" "Still had ammo," Chen gasped, finally letting the pain show. "Still had targets. Extraction can wait." A news drone from one of the galactic networks captured it all. The footage went viral across the galaxy within hours. An injured human fighting for 6 hours with a leg that should have made him unconscious from pain alone. Fighting for aliens he'd never met, on a world he'd never seen because someone had called for help. In space, the Korshal Supreme Commander Vrexthal arrived with his personal fleet. He was ancient by Korshal standards, nearly 5 centuries old, and he had never lost a battle. He watched the humans fight his forces and felt something he hadn't experienced in 200 years. Uncertainty. These mammals should be dead. Their technology was inferior. Their numbers were fewer. They should have broken and run days ago. Instead, they fought harder. When their ships were damaged, they repaired them while fighting. When their soldiers were wounded, they bandaged themselves and kept shooting. When by all logic and reason they should have surrendered, they advanced. "Open a channel," Vrexthal ordered. "I wish to speak with their commander." Admiral Chen appeared on his screen, and he saw something in her eyes that made him understand. She was exhausted. He could see it in every line of her face. But she was nowhere near done. She would fight until her ships were destroyed and her people were dead, and she would do it without hesitation. "I am Supreme Commander Vrexthal," he said formally. "You fight well for mammals. Tell me, what drives you to such extremes? This is not your world. These are not your people. Why do you sacrifice yourselves?" Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, tired and sad. "Because they called for help, Commander. And where we come from, when someone calls for help, you answer. It's that simple." Vrexthal studied her. "I have fought for 500 years. I have never seen warriors like you. You are either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most foolish. I have not decided which. Does it matter?" Chen asked. "Either way, we're not leaving until the Sivathi are safe." The Supreme Commander nodded slowly. This was going to be a long fight. The battle had entered its 4th day when the Korshal made their fatal mistake. Supreme Commander Vrexthal had grown frustrated with the humans' stubborn refusal to break. His forces were exhausted, his ships were damaged, and these primitive mammals were still fighting with the same intensity as when they'd arrived. It made no sense. It violated every principle of warfare he understood, so he gave an order that he would regret for the rest of his life. "Target the civilian shelter at coordinates 773. Full orbital bombardment." His tactical officer hesitated. "Commander, that facility is clearly marked as non-military. There are families inside. The Sivathi young—" "I am aware," Vrexthal cut him off. "The humans fight for the Sivathi. Remove the Sivathi. Remove their motivation. Fire." 3 heavy plasma cannons turned toward the planet's surface. They fired simultaneously, their combined power enough to crack a small moon. The shelter never stood a chance. It simply ceased to exist, along with 3,000 Sivathi civilians who had been huddled inside, praying for rescue that would come too late. The blast was visible from orbit, a brief flash of light that turned the surrounding area into molten glass. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Chen watched it happen. She watched the readings spike. She watched the shelter's beacon disappear from her tactical display. She understood immediately what had occurred. For a long moment, she said nothing. The bridge was silent except for the quiet beeping of instruments. Then someone started crying. She couldn't tell who. It didn't matter. How many? Her voice was flat, emotionless. 3,000 confirmed, Admiral, Lieutenant Park said quietly. His hands were shaking. All civilians. Mostly families. They were in the deepest shelter we'd found. We thought they were safe there. Chen closed her eyes. She had 2 children back on Earth, safe in their grandmother's house while their mother fought in the stars. She thought about them often, their faces helping her push through the exhaustion and fear. Now she thought about the Sivathi children, who had died screaming in nuclear fire, who had waited for help that had been so close, so very close, but not close enough. When she opened her eyes, everyone on the bridge flinched. There was something different about her expression, something cold and final. "Get me Supreme Commander Vrexthal. Now." The Korshal appeared on her screen, his massive form radiating satisfaction. Admiral Chen, I trust you observed our demonstration. Surrender your forces or we will continue cleansing the planet of... You just made a terrible mistake, Chen said softly. Vrexthal paused. I beg your pardon? We've been holding back, she continued in that same quiet, deadly tone. We have rules of engagement, protocols, laws about what we can and cannot do in warfare. Do you know why we have those rules, Commander? He didn't answer. We have them because of what we're capable of without them. We have them because humans learned long ago that if we don't restrain ourselves, we become monsters. We've spent centuries building laws to hold back what we really are. She leaned forward. You just broke those laws for us. You murdered children. Our rules don't apply anymore. She cut the connection and turned to her crew. Every face was hard, every eye burning with the same cold fury she felt. All ships. All personnel. This is Admiral Chen. As of this moment, we are operating under unrestricted warfare protocols. Authorization code. Broken arrow. Everything we've held back, every weapon we deemed too cruel, every tactic we considered too brutal, deploy it all. We are no longer here to rescue civilians. We're here for justice, and we will have it. The response was immediate and terrifying. From the human ships, weapons that had been locked away were brought online. Cluster munitions that violated 3 separate galactic treaties. Railgun rounds with microfusion warheads. Nanite swarms designed to dismantle ships molecule by molecule. Chemical weapons that made plasma burns look merciful. On the ground, the Marines received their new orders. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked at her datapad, read the authorization code, and felt her stomach twist. Then she thought about the children who had died screaming and her hands steadied. Listen up, she called to her squad. Gloves are off. We're going full Deathworld on these bastards. No more warning shots. No more accepting surrenders. They want to see what humans are capable of? Let's show them. The human special forces who had been held in reserve launched their assault. They were the best of the best, drawn from dozens of Earth's elite military units. SEALs, Spetsnaz, SS, Sayeret Matkal, warriors who had spent their entire adult lives learning to kill. Commander Sarah Okonkwo led the strike team that breached the Korshal flagship. They cut through the hull with shaped charges, entered through the bleeding wound, and moved through the ship like ghosts. Any Korshal who tried to stop them died before they could raise their weapons. The humans didn't shout warnings or call for surrender. They just killed, efficient and silent and absolutely ruthless. The Korshal crew panicked. These weren't warriors fighting with honor. These were predators hunting prey. The humans used the ship's own systems against its crew, venting compartments into space, locking doors to trap groups of Korshal in kill zones, even hijacking the internal communications to spread fear and confusion. Okonkwo and her team reached the command deck in 20 minutes. They blew the doors and rushed in, weapons up. The Korshal officers reached for their sidearms. They were too slow. The humans cut them down without hesitation, all except Vrexthal. Okonkwo put 3 rounds into the deck at his feet, close enough that the concrete chips drew blood from his legs. He froze. You get one chance, Okonkwo said, her rifle never wavering. Order your forces to retreat from this system. All ships, all ground troops. You have 60 seconds to comply. Vrexthal stared at her. She was small by Korshal standards, barely reaching his chest even though he was seated. But her eyes held something that made his ancient warrior's instinct scream danger. She would kill him, not because she wanted to, but because he was in her way. If I refuse, he asked, then we kill every single Korshal in this system. Okonkwo replied without emotion. And then we follow your retreat back to your homeworlds. And we keep killing until there's no one left who remembers what happened here. We're very good at extinction events, Commander. We've caused enough on our own world. She meant it. He could see it in her stance, hear it in her voice. This wasn't a bluff or a negotiating tactic. This was a promise from a species that had climbed to dominance on a world so hostile that 9 out of 10 species who tried to colonize it died within a year. Vrexthal had lived for 5 centuries. He wanted to see 6. All forces, he said into his communicator. Full retreat. Abandon the system. This is a direct order from Supreme Command. Across the planet and in orbit, Korshal forces began withdrawing. They left their equipment behind, their wounded, even their dead. They just ran, desperate to escape before the humans decided that retreat wasn't enough. The human ships didn't pursue. They held position, weapons locked on the fleeing vessels ready to fire if even one Korshal ship turned back. On the planet's surface, the Scivathi began emerging from hiding. They had watched the humans fight for 4 days. They had seen these strange aliens take wounds that should have been fatal and keep fighting. They had watched them mourn their own dead with tears streaming down their faces, then turn around and charge back into battle with renewed fury. Now they watched the Marines standing guard over the shattered city, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. The humans looked exhausted beyond measure. Many were wounded. All of them were covered in the gray dust that had once been buildings, now mixed with blood, both human and Korshal. A young Scivathi, barely more than a child, approached Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. She tensed, then forced herself to lower her rifle. The child held out a small flower, one of the few living things left in the rubble. Rodriguez took it with shaking hands. She looked down at the flower, at this small gesture of gratitude, and felt something break inside her. The cold fury that had carried her through the last day cracked, and underneath it was just exhaustion and grief. "You're welcome, kid," she said softly. "You're safe now." The child hugged her leg, and Rodriguez had to look away to hide her tears. 3 months after the Battle of Siva Prime, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The Grand Chamber on Nexus Station was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from 67 species all demanding to be heard. The gallery was filled with news drones from every major network in the galaxy, their cameras recording everything for trillions of viewers across known space. At the center of the controversy stood humanity. The Korshal Dominion had filed formal protests with the Council. They claimed the humans had violated every rule of civilized warfare. They had used forbidden weapons. They had attacked with excessive force. They had shown no mercy to honorable warriors. The list of grievances went on for pages. Ambassador Sarah Williams sat in the human delegation box, listening to the Korshal representative rant. Beside her sat Admiral Chen, still wearing her uniform, and Commander Okonkwo, who had insisted on attending despite her injuries. Behind them, a full honor guard of Marines stood at attention, their dress uniforms crisp, their bearing perfect, their eyes hard. "The humans are savages," the Korshal delegate was saying, his forearms gesturing wildly. "They come from a world so hostile it should be quarantined. They fight without honor. They refuse to accept defeat. They are a danger to the entire galactic community." The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Some species nodded in agreement. Others remained silent, thoughtful. The Hexari representative, who had argued for procedure 3 months ago, looked distinctly uncomfortable. The council speaker raised all 6 arms, calling for order. "We have heard the Korshal complaint. Now we will hear the human defense. Ambassador Williams, you may speak." Williams stood slowly. She had prepared a speech, carefully worded and diplomatically phrased. She crumpled it up and threw it away. "I'm not going to defend what we did," she said quietly. "I'm going to explain it. 3 months ago, the Scivathi sent out a distress call. They were being attacked. Their people were dying. They begged for help." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species that had sat in this very room and done nothing. This council debated. You discussed procedures and protocols. You worried about diplomatic complications. You did everything except help. So we went alone. You violated territorial agreements. The Korshal delegate shouted. "We saved lives," Williams shot back. "Or tried to. We were too late for many, including the 3,000 civilians your Supreme Commander murdered in an orbital bombardment of a marked civilian shelter." Shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Korshal delegate's expression shifted. "That was a legitimate military target. It was full of children," Admiral Chen said, standing. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like a whip crack. "I watched you kill them. I watched your commander give the order, and then I watched him try to use those deaths as leverage to make us surrender." She walked to the center of the chamber, ignoring protocol. The guards didn't stop her. "You want to know why humans fight the way we do? Because we come from a world where everything tries to kill you. Our weather, our animals, our diseases, even our plants are poisonous. We survived by becoming the most stubborn, most adaptable, most relentless species our planet ever produced." She turned slowly, addressing the entire council. "But that's not why we went to Siva Prime. We didn't go because we're good at fighting. We went because it was right. Because when someone calls for help, you answer. That's what separates civilization from chaos. Pretty words, the Korshal delegate sneered. But you are still warmongers. Still dangerous. Still, excuse me, a new voice spoke up. An elderly Sivathi stood at one of the observation platforms. She was small even for her species. Her fur gray with age, her large eyes dim but steady. May I speak? The council speaker hesitated, then nodded. Elder Talessa, you have the floor. The Sivathi moved slowly to a speaker's position. She carried a staff for balance, and Williams noticed that she bore scars, fresh ones from the battle. I am Talessa, first scholar of Siva Prime. I survived the occupation because humans came halfway across the galaxy to save us. She looked at the Korshal delegate. You want to speak of honor? Your warriors killed my students. They murdered my colleagues. They hunted my people for sport. And when humans came to stop you, you killed 3,000 civilians to try to make them leave. Her voice, though quiet, held absolute authority. The humans did not abandon us. When your forces retreated, they stayed. They shared their food with us. They used their medical supplies on our wounded. They helped us bury our dead, she paused, and they cried with us. These so-called savages stood in the ruins of our city and wept for people they had never met. The chamber was absolutely silent now. They have honor, Talessa continued. More than you, more than this council that sat and debated while we died. They came when no one else would. They fought when everyone else was afraid. And they stayed to help us rebuild when they could have simply left. She turned to face Williams and Chen. The humans saved 17,000 of my people. 17,000 souls who would have died if not for their intervention. Whatever complaints you have about their methods, remember this. They answered when we called. And we will never forget that. Talessa bowed deeply to the human delegation, a gesture of profound respect among her people. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart and on behalf of every Sivathi who still draws breath, thank you. Williams felt tears burning in her eyes. Chen's jaw was clenched tight. Even Okonkwo had to look away. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some species called for sanctions against humanity. Others demanded that the Korshal be punished for their war crimes. The argument raged for hours. Finally, the council speaker raised all 6 arms once more. We will take a vote. The question before us is simple. Should humanity be censured for their actions at Siva Prime? The vote was not even close. 43 species voted against sanctions. Only 9 voted for them. The rest abstained. The motion fails, the speaker announced. Then he did something unprecedented. He turned to Williams and bowed, a gesture of respect from a species that considered themselves above humans in every way. Ambassador Williams, Admiral Chen, Commander Okonkwo, the Council recognizes that your actions, while outside standard protocol, were undertaken in defense of innocent lives. No sanctions will be imposed. He paused. However, we must address what happens next. 12 species have already approached Earth requesting defense agreements. They fear aggression from more powerful neighbors, and they believe humanity would come to their aid. Is this true? Williams stepped forward. She thought about all the nights she'd spent arguing with Earth's leaders about what role humanity should play in galactic affairs. They had wanted to stay neutral, to avoid conflict, to focus on building their own worlds. That was before Siva Prime, before they'd seen what happened when no one answered the call. We didn't want this role, she said honestly. We're new here. We're still learning how everything works. But we learned something important in the last 3 months. The galaxy needs someone willing to stand up for those who can't defend themselves. She took a breath. So yes, it's true. If you need help, Earth will answer. Not because we want war or territory. Not because we seek glory. But because it's right. Because everyone deserves someone to call when darkness comes. The chamber exploded with reaction. Some species cheered. Others protested. The Korshal delegate stormed out, his delegation following. 6 months later, the first Peacekeeper-class carrier launched from Earth's orbital shipyards. It was larger than the Indomitable, more heavily armed, designed specifically for rapid response to distress calls. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge watching as the name was painted on the hull in letters 3 meters tall. SOS answered. Behind it, 5 more peacekeepers were under construction. Behind those, dozens more were planned. Earth had accepted its new role not with enthusiasm but with grim determination. They would be the galaxy's guardians, not because they wanted to, but because someone had to. On Siva Prime, the reconstruction continued. Humans worked alongside Savathi, rebuilding what had been destroyed. In the center of the capital, where the civilian shelter had once stood, they built a monument. It showed a human and a Savathi standing together, the human's hand on the Savathi's shoulder, both looking toward the stars. The inscription was written in both languages and every major galactic tongue. When the Deathworlders' wrath took to the stars, it came not for conquest but for justice. Across the galaxy, aggressive empires quietly recalculated their expansion plans. The Korshal Dominion withdrew from Council space, nursing wounds both physical and to their pride. Smaller species slept a little easier, knowing that somewhere out there someone was listening for their call. And on Earth, young men and women continued to enlist, ready to serve, ready to fight, ready to answer when the next distress signal came, because that's what humans did. When someone called for help, they answered. Every single time. The galaxy had learned what it meant to anger a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of a Deathworld's food chain. They had learned what it meant when humanity went to war not for resources or territory, but for justice. They had learned that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy wasn't the one with the biggest claws or the strongest weapons. It was the one who fought for something bigger than itself, the one who would sacrifice everything for people they'd never met, the one who answered the call. And the galaxy would never be the same.